Hi there, this is Chris Epting back with part 2 of our online memoir writing workshop, brought to you by the Newport Public Library and sponsored by the Friends of the Library. So big thanks to them for offering a program like this. Since we last spoke in part 1, hopefully you have fleshed out segments of your life and some of the personalities from those parts of your life. And then most importantly, you've begun listing some of the stories from the segments of your life. That's what we're going to talk about today, stories. But before we get there, were we doing this class in person, which I hope we get to do at some point, this would be the part of the program where I would stop and I would look at you and ask you, what are you reading right now? And hopefully you would have an answer. You would tell me some great book or series of books or something you're in the middle of reading. And if you weren't reading anything, I would stop and tell you very seriously that in my opinion, you need to be reading something. Now, I believe reading is good all the time for everybody, no matter what. I'm a reader, and I think reading enhances everything in life. I really do. But I think it's most important when you make the decision to start writing, especially writing a memoir. Reading at that point becomes even more important. Why? It lets you begin to understand what a reader might want to see. You know what I mean? As a reader, you're feeling words, you're feeling an attitude about writing, you're immersing yourself in how somebody writes. That can give you stronger fundamentals in your own writing. It can give you a feel for certain stylistic approaches, how you approach dialogue, how you approach metaphor, transition, all of those great parts of literature that we would talk about in our live sessions. Reading does that. If you're reading all the time, it's going to really help you. So if you're not reading something now, do it. I mean, during this time of shutdown right now, the Newport Public Library is actually offering curbside service. So you can go pick up books there. There's actually no excuse to not be reading a book right now. There are plenty of places to get great books, including your library. So please do that. Please start reading something if you're not, although I'm sure many of you are. Now, as far as what we're going to talk about today, it's important. To me, it's the crux of any good memoir and its story. We're going to talk about how to build a story today. And really why that's so important is for me anyway, a memoir is a collection of stories. So once you can sort of master the format of tackling one story, you can just apply that across any stories from your life that you've got. And then ultimately, think of it as almost tiles making a mosaic. That's what a memoir is. And however you arrange those tiles will give your mosaic a certain attitude, a certain tone, a certain flavor. We'll get to that stuff later, but what's important now is to think about and learn about how to construct a story. There are a lot of ways to do it. There's kind of a theory I fall back on that I really think is solid, and it stems back to the 1800s when there was a German playwright named Gustav Freytag, and he was a writer himself, and he wanted to think of a way to help people interpret great plays, Shakespearean works, Greek tragedies, Greek drama, all of those things. So he developed a simple way to break down narratives called the Freytag Pyramid. And it's basically a 5-point system that helps you construct a story. It's pretty easy, but you got to stick to it if you want it to work. So what I'm going to do right now is show you the Freytag Pyramid and walk you through each of the 5 parts. Okay, here's the Freytag Pyramid, and you see it lower left there, the exposition. That's the first part. And what the exposition is basically the setup for your story. This is where you give the reader some background information. You familiarize them with the setting, with you, with everything that's going to lead us into the next step, which is the ascending or rising action. As you see that part of the pyramid on the left moving up toward the center. This is where you get the story up and off the ground. These are the details that get the reader activated and engaged in what you're doing, gets them excited as we move toward the top of the pyramid, which is the climax. And that's the conflict point. That's where the part of your story really all comes together. This is what most readers are waiting for when they start reading a story. It's this point right here. Immediately after the conflict or climax up top, we begin the descending or falling action. And that's where we're kind of coming to grips with what's just happened. We're sort of playing out the rest of the story and getting the reader back down to earth to the last point there on the lower right, which is what the French call the denouement, which basically means the resolution. And the resolution is where we make sense of what happened. We've survived the story, we've made it through, and now we're going to explain what it meant to us. And why this is important, the denouement, is it allows you, the writer,
to put your feelings in here now and really reflect and expose your feelings about what this story did to you. And that's a very important part of memoir, your feelings. We could all see the same event and write about it fairly accurately, but it's the end, the denouement, where our feelings go, that makes a story very individual and very special.
Okay, so now you've seen the Freytag Pyramid. Hopefully you kind of starting to get a sense of what that's like. What I'd like to do now is tell you a story. It's like story time now. And what I want you to do as I tell you the story is think about the 5 parts. See if you can identify the parts as I walk you through my story. At the end, we'll kind of revisit it. But for right now, I want you to use what I just told you about and think about it as I tell you the story. Okay, so get comfortable. Just a couple of minutes story here. This goes back to, I got out of college in the early 1980s. And my first job was at an ad agency in New York City. And I loved it. I loved living in New York. It was really exciting. In my early 20s, it was just a really, you know, if you remember back to what that's like, that first real sense of responsibility and freedom and independence. And I wanted to be a writer at that time. And I thought I would start out writing at an ad agency, being a copywriter, writing ads and commercials. I thought, I grew up in a household where my dad was in advertising, so I kind of knew what that felt like. And it was always fun watching the creative guys at an ad agency. So that was my first job. And I was sort of, you know, very low rung, really entry level. And then our company, our ad agency, also had another, like a production company that was part of it. And we got hired to produce the very first MTV Music Video Awards in 1984. MTV at that point, I think, was just 2 or 3 years old, had exploded. It was really popular. And our company got hired to actually produce the first award show, which were going to be held at Radio City Music Hall in New York City, one of the most famous venues in the world. And what was really great about it was that a number of us working at the agency got assigned to work various jobs on that show. And I think I got the plum of an assignment. My job, if you want to call it that, was to, Dan Aykroyd was one of the co-hosts. Dan Aykroyd co-hosted it with Bette Midler. And I was to sort of shadow him, help him write his little bits that he was going to be doing when he co-hosted, basically keep him company, keep him focused, and work through the bits that he was going to have to do on television. So for me, it was a thrill because I was really by his side for a couple of weeks leading up to the show. Well, as the show got closer, dress rehearsals began, and one of the biggest performance numbers at the show was going to be Madonna performing a song called Like a Virgin. Now, in 1984, Madonna was big, she was popular, but she wasn't an icon. That hadn't happened yet. And I knew who she was. I was a fan of hers. I thought she was great. And as the rehearsals began, there was a problem at Radio City. Everything was running behind. Again, the first time this show had ever been done, so things were a little bit askew. And she did not like waiting. And that was obvious. She did not want to be kept waiting. And so the director at one point pulls me aside and he goes, look, he goes, she's getting very heated. We're going to be a couple of hours. I need you to get her out of here, take her around the corner, take her to lunch, go kill at least 90 minutes, and then we should be ready for her. And, you know, Dan Aykroyd said, hey, good luck with that. And I thought, well, this could be interesting. She didn't really want to go at first, but I said to her, look, you don't have much choice in this. They need some time. Come on. And I just basically whisked her out of Radio City out a side door. And we went maybe a half a block. She wasn't, again, she was recognizable at that point, but not a household name, certainly, and not, you know, somebody everybody knew. So we ducked into this restaurant on 6th Avenue and we sat there. And once she got over the fact that she was being basically kidnapped for lunch by me, we had a really cool conversation. And she started talking about, I said, what are you doing tonight? What's your performance going to be? And she started telling me how she originally wanted to bring a Bengal tiger onto stage and do this whole thing, and they wouldn't let her do that. But she had this other idea where she was going to come out of a wedding cake in this wedding dress, and she says, look, she goes, it's all I can tell you is it's going to be very talked about. She goes, this is my moment where I think I can really make an impact and get people talking about me. So she was, what I liked about Madonna at that point is she seemed very focused on success, and she had a plan for what she was going to do. And this show was part of that plan. So again, we spend this really interesting, very open conversation lunch. And then I check my watch. It's time to go back. I get her back into Radio City. They're ready for her. And she kind of does a technical walkthrough, which she's going to do without revealing. She's not in costume or anything. It's just sort of a very bare bones walkthrough of her lip syncing the song Like a Virgin. Shortly after that, it's showtime. I'm with Dan Aykroyd, and it's live television, so it's very hustle bustle, really exciting. But then it comes time for Madonna to perform Like a Virgin, and the cake comes out. She climbs out of it, and she does this really suggestive, very memorable, very impactful, I want to call it a dance of sorts. She's writhing around on the floor. Anyway, you could tell while she was doing it, just from the looks on the crowd's faces. Rock royalty was sitting in the first couple of rows. All jaws were dropped. It was a riveting performance. She comes off stage, we make eye contact, and she kind of winks as if to say, like, I told you I was gonna go big here. The rest of the show, there were big stars on that show. I mean, everybody from, Tina Turner, Daryl Hall and John Oates, Prince was there. It was a big night, but all I could think about was that performance through the rest of the show. There was an after party. I don't think I got home till 6 or 7 the next morning, but all I kept thinking about was that performance by Madonna. And people started calling me the next day about it, wanting to know about the show, but really wanting to know about her and that performance. As it turns out, that performance really was the moment where she blew up and became a household name, the iconic Madonna as we know today. And I always think back to that lunch that we had and how we were hours away from her crossing that line into becoming one of the most famous performers on the planet. And I never forgot that, because it reminds me that we all get these chances in life. Like, you have a few moments in life where you can really make a difference. You can really shift things, take that path that might be a little bit riskier, but the rewards can be that much richer if you do it and you do it right. And that was a lesson I learned that night. The fire in her eyes, the determination in her eyes, and what she went out there and did, and the impact it had, was something that still affects me today. So that's my Madonna story. Very quickly, let's think of those 5 parts of the pyramid. What was the exposition? The exposition was me telling you about working in New York City, coming out of college and getting my first job. That was me kind of setting the table. The ascending storyline, what was that? It was talking about the MTV Awards show, talking about Dan Aykroyd, talking about going to lunch with Madonna. What's the climax? The climax, of course, is the performance of Like a Virgin, which turns her career, from, again, really kicks it into high gear. That becomes the climax of that story. The descending action, what is that? It's me thinking about the show, the rest of the show, and how her performance was the one thing that I couldn't get out of my mind. What's the denouement, the resolution? That's me looking back at my personal feelings about what I learned from that moment and how it still affects me today, and how I looked at it and sort of how the theme became going for things in a big way. So there you have a concept of how you can take a story in 5 parts if you break it down properly, and you have yourselves a story. So here's what I would like you to do now. I want you to go back to lesson 1 from the first video, take one of those stories that you put on your list, okay? I want you to take that one story, and I want you to flesh it out into maybe a page, not a lot. 1 page, double spaced, maybe 500-600 words, and I want you to craft that story with exposition, ascending action, the climax, descending, and the denouement. Not in a ton of detail, very simple, very bare bones, okay? Couple of sentences per part of the pyramid, okay? I don't want you to go crazy with it yet, because this is a very, very basic first draft. What we're gonna do in video 3, I'm gonna show you how to take that draft and really unpack it and develop things like sensory writing and how to show and not tell and do things that are real basic rules of the road for writing. But what you can do now for me is, again, write a very basic version of one of your stories, apply Freytag's Pyramid, and then in video 3, like I said, we will help you develop it more. Sound good? Okay, cool. Go find a good story. Thank you for spending time. Thank you to the Newport Public Library for bringing this program to you, and to the Friends of the Library for sponsoring it. I'm Chris Epting, and I will see you in the next video.